$43,000 disappeared from my account overnight, and when I asked, they told me I was confused, that I must have moved it myself. And for a moment, I believed them, until I found out my emails had been changed and my money was being redirected into an account I was never meant to see. And what started as a family betrayal turned into something much bigger, because the pattern led straight to federal violations. And by the time investigators stepped in, they already had enough to act. I still remember the exact moment, 6:12 in the morning, when everything collapsed at once. Doors opened, records pulled, and the truth came out faster than they could hide it. And in the end, it did not just cost them money, it cost them everything, including their freedom. Because this was never just about divorce. This was revenge. And I am Miss Lena, and this is the story of how they erased me and how I made sure the system erased them back. Chapter 1. The envelope I was not supposed to open. I found out I was pregnant on a quiet Tuesday morning in March 2025 in the cramped restroom behind a CVS 2 blocks from my house, the kind of place you pass 100 times without thinking it could ever matter. I was 49, standing under a flickering light, holding a plastic test that did not hesitate. 2 lines, clear enough that there was no room to pretend otherwise. I did not feel happy. I felt my chest tighten, like something had already started to shift before I could catch up to it. I stayed there longer than I needed to, staring at my reflection. I looked the same, but something in my face felt different. Not broken, not yet, just aware in a way I had not been the day before. 2 days later, Dr. Helen Strauss confirmed it in a quiet office that smelled faintly of antiseptic and something soft trying to cover it. She spoke carefully, walking me through risks, complications, and the kind of numbers that stay with you long after the conversation ends. If insurance did not cover everything, the cost could reach close to $28,000. I nodded like I understood all of it. Maybe I did. Maybe I did not want to. When I stood to leave, she paused and looked at me a little longer. You need to prepare for every possible outcome. That was the part that followed me out the door. I drove home slower than usual, both hands on the wheel, trying to hold on to something steady. Daniel Brooks was in the living room when I walked in, his laptop open, scrolling through property listings like any other afternoon. I placed the ultrasound image in front of him. He barely looked. "We're not doing this." His voice was calm, certain, like he had already had this conversation somewhere in his head and I was just catching up. He said he did not want a child at this age. He said the risks were too high. He said bringing a baby into the world like this was irresponsible. Then he said something that landed harder than everything else. I am not paying for this. I felt that settle somewhere deep, not sharp, just heavy enough that it didn't move. Before I could say anything else, he reached into his bag and pulled out a folder, divorce papers, already signed. He walked me through it like a business deal. He would keep the house since he paid most of the mortgage. The car was in his name. We would divide whatever else was left, which suddenly didn't sound like much. We had spent years building that life, the house, the savings, the accounts we checked without thinking, everything tied together in a way that once felt safe, and now he was talking about it like it had already been taken apart. 17 years reduced to a few pages on a table. That night, the house felt different, not empty, just unfamiliar, like I was walking through something I used to belong to. I sat in the kitchen long after it got dark, not really thinking, just trying to sit still. That was when I noticed the envelope. It was on the counter, plain except for the FedEx label. No name, no clear sender, just our address printed neatly. I picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. Something inside shifted slightly when I tilted it. I don't know why, but it made me uneasy, not in a dramatic way, just enough that I kept looking at it, like it might explain something I didn't yet understand. For a moment, I almost opened it. Instead, I set it back down. I told myself I still had some control, that I could choose when to face things, even if everything else was starting to slip. The next morning, Marissa Hale called. She had been my closest friend for more than 10 years. We met at the bank where I worked in risk analysis, back when everything felt predictable. She had moved up faster than anyone I knew. Now she was a senior manager at First Atlantic Community Bank, someone people listened to without questioning. She heard something in my voice before I explained anything. She came over within an hour, carrying food I didn't remember asking for. She sat beside me without pushing, without trying to fix everything at once. She just stayed. She drove me to my next appointment and waited while I went in. She didn't check her watch. She didn't rush me. On the drive back, she glanced at me and said I didn't have to decide anything right now, just get through today. There was something steady about her, something that made the noise in my head quiet down a little. Later that evening, we sat at the kitchen table again, the same place, but it felt different with her there. She noticed the envelope. "What's that?" I told her it had arrived the day before, that I hadn't opened it yet. She picked it up, turning it slightly in her hands, just for a second, then set it back down. "Probably nothing important. You'd know if it was." I nodded because I wanted to believe that. We talked about practical things after that, lawyers, appointments, what I might need if things moved forward the way they were starting to. At one point, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not alone in this." I believed her. I remember thinking that even if everything else was starting to fall apart, I still had one person who was on my side, someone I trusted without hesitation. I didn't realize how much had already been taken from me. The envelope stayed on the counter, untouched, waiting, and somewhere inside me, something had gone quiet. Not broken, just watching. Chapter 2. Everything started disappearing. The next morning I woke up before the sun, not because I wanted to, but because something in me refused to stay asleep. The house felt different, like it no longer belonged to me in the way it used to. It was still mine on paper, at least for now, but that feeling was already slipping. Evan Carter was in the living room exactly where I expected him to be. Laptop open, coffee untouched, eyes locked on numbers that seemed to matter more than anything else in the room. "You should call an attorney today," he said, without looking up. I stood there for a moment, letting that settle. Not a question, not a concern, just instruction. "I will," I said. He nodded once, like that closed the topic. I made coffee and sat across from him. The ultrasound photo was still on the table. He had not moved it, had not even turned it over. I asked him if he had ever loved me. I did not plan to ask, it just came out. He finally looked at me then, not angry, not guilty, just distant. "This is not about that." It was the same answer as before, but hearing it again made something inside me go still in a different way. Not hurt, not shocked, just aware that whatever we had was already over long before he said it out loud. Later that day, he handed me another stack of documents. Organized, clean, already prepared. 65% of the assets, full control of the house equity, no mention of medical costs, no space for discussion. "You already decided all of this," I said. "I am being realistic," he replied. Realistic. It sounded less like logic and more like permission, like he had already decided what I was worth and did not feel the need to explain it. Everything we built together suddenly felt like it was being divided without me in the room. The house, the savings, the accounts we had checked for years without thinking. It was never just money. It was every small decision I made to feel safe, to believe we were building something steady. And now it was being taken apart like it never belonged to me. My phone rang before I could respond. Marissa Hale. I stepped into the kitchen to answer. "Tell me what happened," she said. I told her, not everything at once, just enough for her to understand the shape of it. "I will be there soon." She arrived faster than I expected, moving through the house with quiet confidence. She set her bag down, looked at the papers, then looked at me. "You are not signing this," she said. I let out a breath. "He is trying to push you into a corner." "I know." She sat beside me and started flipping through the documents, her eyes scanning quickly. "This is aggressive. He is assuming you will not fight back." Her voice was calm, but there was something sharp underneath it. She told me about an attorney, Daniel Mercer, someone who knew how to handle cases like this, someone who would not let things slide just to keep it simple. "You need someone who understands how these negotiations actually work," she said, "not someone who just wants it over." She stayed with me while I made the call, listened to every word, watched my reactions like she was tracking something. When I hung up, she gave a small nod. "Good. That's a start." For a moment, I believed that. 2 days later, something else shifted. I opened one of our joint accounts, the one we used for daily expenses. It had always been stable, predictable, the kind of account you never worry about. The number on the screen did not make sense. 48,000 had been there. Now it was barely 5. I stared at it, waiting for it to correct itself. It did not. That account was not just money. It was years of quiet saving, small decisions, things I said no to so we could feel secure later. It was supposed to be the part of our life that did not disappear overnight. My hands felt cold as I called the bank. "The transactions are authorized," the representative said. "There are no issues on the account." "Authorized by who?" There was a pause. "By an account holder." I ended the call slowly. Marissa was sitting across from me, watching. "How much was there before?" she asked. 48. And now? 5. "Did you receive any alerts, any emails?" "No." "Did anything change in your account settings recently?" I shook my head. She leaned forward slightly, focused in a way that made me pause. "We should go through everything," she said. "Make sure nothing else was touched." We spent the next hour reviewing details, security settings, transaction logs, access history. She asked questions that felt precise, not just helpful, but exact, like she already knew where to look and just needed me to confirm it. At the time, I told myself that was a good thing. At work, things were shifting too. I was called into a meeting with Human Resources. Mark Ellis sat across from me, his expression careful. "Given your situation, we think it would be best to adjust your role temporarily." Temporarily. The word felt thin. "So you are replacing me," I said. "No, just reallocating responsibilities." I held his gaze. "You already have someone else doing my job." He did not answer. That was enough. When I returned to my desk, it already felt different. Emails slower, conversations shorter, like I had quietly stopped existing there and everyone else had agreed not to mention it. That night, my mother called. "You should not go through with this pregnancy. You will not be able to handle it alone." I listened for a moment. "I am not alone." "Are you sure about that?" I did not answer. I ended the call. The silence in the house felt heavier after that. I walked into the kitchen without thinking. The envelope was still there, unopened, but it did not feel harmless anymore. Everything around me was shifting, money disappearing, my marriage collapsing, my job slipping away, people telling me they were helping while nothing actually stopped getting worse. I reached for the envelope. For a second, I hesitated. Then I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have, and this time, I knew. Whatever was inside it was not just information, it was the beginning of something I had not been prepared to see. Chapter 3. The Pattern That Didn't Make Sense. I did not rush into anything after that. I set the envelope down, sat back in my chair, and let the silence settle. It was not the kind of silence that felt empty. It felt like something had just clicked into place, and my mind needed a second to catch up. Then I reached for my notebook again. If I was going to understand what was happening, I needed more than a feeling. I needed proof that held together from every angle. I started from the beginning. Every transaction, every date, every amount. I pulled up the account history again and wrote everything down carefully. Not just the large transfers, the small ones too. The ones that would not draw attention unless you were looking for them. It did not take long to see it clearly. The money had not disappeared all at once. It had been moved slowly, deliberately, over time. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, always spaced just far enough apart to avoid triggering anything obvious. I leaned back and stared at the page. That was not panic. That was patience. The next step were the alerts. I checked every folder in my email again. Inbox, spam, archived messages. I even searched by keywords. Nothing. There should have been something. I logged back into the account settings and went straight to notifications. The email had been changed. Not to Evan, not to me, to an address I had never seen before. It looked clean, generic, recently created. I felt that same quiet shift inside me again. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. I picked up the phone and called the bank. The representative sounded different this time, younger, less certain. The changes were made in person, she said. In person where? At a branch location. Which branch? There was a brief pause before she answered. North Ridge Financial Center. I knew that branch. It was where Marissa worked. I thanked her and ended the call. I did not say anything out loud. I did not react, but something in me stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. That afternoon, she came over again. Same routine, same calm presence. She set her bag down, glanced at me, then at the table. "Did you find anything new?" she asked. I watched her for a second before answering. "A few things." "Like what?" I walked her through the pattern, the timing, the transfers. She listened closely, nodding at certain points, asking questions that felt a little too precise. Did the amounts increase over time? Yes. Were they spaced out evenly or regular? Mostly even. Did you check if multiple accounts were involved? I paused. Not yet. She leaned forward slightly. You should. If this is intentional, it would not come from just one place. I held her gaze for a second longer than I normally would have. That makes sense, I said. Every word she said sounded helpful. That was what made it harder to ignore the feeling underneath it. Later, I mentioned Evan casually. He's been out more at night. She hesitated, just for a second. Then she looked back at me. He's probably dealing with this in his own way. Maybe. I nodded, but I did not look away. Something about that pause stayed with me. That night, after she left, I went back to my notes. I pulled up Evan's recent spending. There were charges I did not recognize, a restaurant, several times over the past few weeks. I searched the address. It was 3 blocks from the bank. I stared at the screen for a long time. It was not proof, but it was not random either. The next morning, I met with Daniel Mercer again. I handed him everything I had gathered. He reviewed it carefully, slipping through pages, scanning numbers, pausing at certain points. "This is concerning," he said. "Concerning is not enough." He exhaled slowly. "It suggests a pattern, but it is not enough to take immediate legal action. We would need a direct link, something that clearly connects both parties to the transfers." "So we wait while everything keeps disappearing?" He looked at me. "We proceed carefully." Carefully. That word felt heavier than it should have.
While he was thinking about limits, everything in my life was already being taken apart piece by piece. I left his office knowing he was not going to move fast enough for what was happening. That meant I could not rely on him. A few days later, I went to my prenatal appointment alone. The waiting room was quiet, filled with soft voices and the low hum of machines. I sat there with a clipboard in my hands, staring at numbers that suddenly felt very real. Estimated costs, follow-up visits, possible complications. I started doing the math in my head. If the house was gone, if my job disappeared, if the accounts kept draining, where did that leave me? Where did that leave this child? It was not just money. It was my future being moved out of my reach, one transfer at a time. That night, I went back to the kitchen. The envelope was still there, exactly where I had left it. I picked it up and opened it fully this time. Inside were printed statements, clean, organized. I went through them slowly, page by page. The account was one I didn't recognize. The names were at the top: Evan Carter, Marissa Hale. I stopped breathing for a second. Then I kept reading. The balance was just over $170,000. The transaction stretched back months. Not one account, multiple sources. Every transfer matched the pattern I had been tracking. Every missing dollar had a place to go. I set the papers down carefully. My hands were steady. The two people I trusted most had not just failed me, they had been working together. Every time she sat across from me asking careful questions, she already knew what had been taken. Every time he looked at me like none of this mattered, he already knew where it was going. I did not cry. I did not panic. I sat there in the quiet, looking at everything laid out in front of me, and felt something settle into place. Not confusion, not doubt, clarity. I was not the one losing control. I was finally seeing who had been in control all along.
Chapter 4. I let him think he won. The moment I understood everything, I stopped trying to fight it the way they expected. I did not confront Evan. I did not call Marissa. I did not ask questions that would only warn them I was no longer blind. I shifted. I stopped thinking about how to win. I started thinking about how to make sure they would lose. The difference was quiet, but it changed everything. I went back through every document again, slower this time, more careful. I made copies of everything: statements, transaction logs, my own notes. I organized them by date and by pattern until the whole thing looked less like chaos and more like a map. If they had built this piece by piece, I would take it apart the same way. Daniel Mercer was not enough for what I needed. He was cautious, measured, already thinking about limits while my life was being taken apart in front of me. So I found someone else. Her name was Laura Bennett. Her office was plain, almost forgettable, but when she read through the documents, she did not hesitate. "This is asset concealment," she said. I watched her closely. "And it is coordinated." I nodded. They moved it slowly, different accounts. She tapped the page. That makes it harder to see at first, but easier to prove once the pattern is clear. For the first time since everything started unraveling, I felt something steady. "So we can take this to court now." She shook her head. "Not yet." The words sat between us. Why not? Because right now they can argue access, shared accounts, authorized transfers. We need to show how it was done, not just that it happened. I stayed quiet. She leaned forward slightly. "Someone changed your notification settings, redirected alerts, made sure you would not see what was happening." I thought about Marissa, every visit, every question. "She had access," I said. Laura held my gaze. "Then we prove it." That was the plan. Not confrontation, construction. Over the next few weeks, I did exactly what they expected me to do. I got quieter. Evan kept pushing the settlement. Emails, reminders, small comments that made it sound like dragging things out would only hurt me more. One night,
He stood in the kitchen doorway, watching me. "You should sign," he said. "I'm thinking about it. There's no reason to make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at him for a second. "You already decided what easy looks like." He did not respond. A few days later, I signed. I let my hand hesitate just enough to make it believable. I kept my expression tired, my voice low. When I finished, I slid the papers back to him. "There," I said. He exhaled slowly, something close to relief settling into his posture. He thought the story was over. That was his mistake. Marissa reacted the same way. She came by later that evening, softer than before, less guarded. "You did the right thing," she said. "I hope so. You need to protect what you can." I nodded. "I'm trying." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You will be okay." I let her hold it, but every word she said to me now sounded different. Every question she had asked, every moment she had sat beside me, it all meant something else now that I knew what she had done. I did not pull my hand away. I let both of them believe I was done fighting. That was when they started to relax. Evan stopped being as careful. His schedule opened up. Late nights became normal. Transactions were no longer as clean, less spaced, less hidden. Marissa checked in less often. When she did not ask as many questions. She thought I stopped looking. That was when Laura started building the case. She requested access logs from the bank, system records, timestamps that showed when account settings had been changed, where the requests originated, which credentials were used. It took time, but it came together. "You see this?" she said during one meeting, pointing to a line on the screen. "This is when your notification email was changed." The date matched one of the days Marissa had been sitting across from me, asking if I was okay. "And this," she continued, scrolling down, "this is when the transfer pattern increases." I felt something cold settle in my chest. It was no longer a suspicion, it was structure. For a brief moment, I thought about calling Marissa, asking her why, but the answer wouldn't change anything. What mattered was what I could prove. The court date was set for September 2025. The weeks leading up to it felt strange, quiet. Evan moved through the house like everything had already been decided. Marissa barely came by anymore. When she did, she looked at me like someone checking in on a finished problem. They both thought they had already won. On the morning of the hearing, I got dressed slowly. Nothing dramatic, nothing that stood out. I needed them to see exactly what they expected. Someone tired, someone who had given up. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment, then reached for the folder. Inside it was everything. Every record, every log, every piece of the pattern they thought I would never see. I walked into the courthouse holding it steady in my hands. Evan was already there. Marissa stood beside him. They were close enough that it told me everything I needed to know. When he saw me, Evan gave a small nod, calm, confident. Marissa smiled. "You okay?" she asked. "I am," I said. And this time, it was true. We took our seats. The room settled into a stillness that felt heavier than silence, like something was about to shift. Evan leaned back, relaxed. Marissa glanced at him, then at me. Neither of them looked worried. Neither of them understood what was about to happen. I rested my hand on the folder, feeling the weight of it. Not just paper, control. They thought they had already won. They had no idea they were walking into something they couldn't control anymore.
Chapter 5. The Quietest Kind of Revenge. I kept my eyes on the table as the hearing began, not because I was afraid to look at them, but because I did not need to anymore. I already knew who they were. Ethan Cole's attorney stood first. He spoke with the kind of calm that comes from believing the outcome is already settled. He walked through the agreement I had signed, line by line, slow and deliberate, like repetition alone could make it unquestionable. He said I had reviewed it. He said I had agreed. He said there was nothing unusual about any of it. I let him talk. That version of the story needed to exist before it could fall apart. When he finished, the room went quiet for a moment. the kind of quiet that feels like it is waiting for something. Then Laura Bennett stood. She did not rush. She did not try to match his tone. She just began. She started with the money. Dates, amounts, sequences. At first, it sounded simple, just numbers being read into a record. But then, the pattern started to show itself. Transfers that lined up too cleanly, gaps that were too consistent, movement that was careful in a way normal spending never is. She walked through it slowly, building it piece by piece until it stopped sounding like coincidence. Then she shifted. Account settings. The day my notification email had been changed. The day everything went quiet on my end. I felt my hands tighten in my lap without meaning to. Not panic, just the weight of recognizing the exact moment I had been cut out of my own life without realizing it. Laura continued. Access logs, branch records, timestamps tied to employee credentials. And then she said the name, Marissa Clark. This time I looked up. Marissa did not move right away, but I saw it in her face. That small flicker before control came back. Ethan turned slightly toward her, just enough to show the first crack in his confidence. His attorney stood fast, objecting, pushing back, trying to slow it down. He questioned the records, the relevance, the interpretation. But every question led back to the same place. A second account, jointly held, never disclosed, money moved into it in pieces small enough to avoid attention over months. Notifications redirected so I would never see it happening. At one point, the judge leaned forward and asked a single question. If everything here was authorized, why was it hidden this carefully? No one answered right away. That silence said more than anything else had. The rest of the hearing unfolded without drama, which somehow made it feel heavier. There was no shouting, no sudden reveal, just the slow removal of every excuse they could have used. When it was over, I stood, gathered my things, and walked out without looking at either of them. My hands were steady. 2 weeks later, the decision came in. I opened it at the same kitchen table where everything had started to fall apart. The agreement was void. The court found clear evidence of concealed assets. All funds were to be returned. I read that line twice, letting it settle. Ethan kept the house, but the debt tied to it stayed with him, more than $200,000 that had been building quietly while he was busy moving money somewhere else. For a moment, something in me finally released. Not loud, not dramatic, just a breath I had been holding for months leaving my body. I set the papers down and pressed my hand flat against the table. It was over. A few days later, I heard about Marissa. Internal review, policy violations, termination. There were other words, too, words about possible further action, but those would take time. Ethan called once. I watched his name on my phone until it stopped ringing. He did not leave a message. There was nothing he could say that would change what had already been shown. Life did not suddenly become easy. There was still work to do, still choices to make, still a future I had to rebuild. But the difference was simple. Nothing was being taken from me anymore. Months later, when my son was born, the room felt smaller than I expected, quieter too. My mother stood near the window, hands folded, watching without saying much. At one point, she looked at me and nodded. Not approval, not forgiveness, just presence. That was enough. I held him and felt something settle in me, something that had been shifting ever since the first piece went missing and I couldn't explain why. Back then, something in me had gone quiet. I understand now what that was. It was not weakness. It was not fear. It was the part of me that was watching, waiting until I was ready to see everything clearly. I did not win in the way people think about winning. I did not walk away untouched,
but I walked away aware, and that changed everything. Sometimes I think about how easy it would have been to ignore it all, to sign, to accept, and tell myself it was just bad luck and move on without ever asking the right questions. That's the part that stays with me, not what they did, but how close I came to letting it stand. If you've ever felt that small shift you can't explain, that moment where something doesn't add up, but you push it aside because it feels easier, don't ignore it. Pay attention. Because not everything that takes from you does it loudly. Some of it happens quietly, piece by piece, until one day you look up and realize you're standing in a life that no longer belongs to you. And by then, it feels too late. It's not. You still get to decide what happens next. So I'll ask you this. If you were in that room, if you saw it all too late and had one chance to respond, would you stay quiet and watch like I did? Or would you confront it the moment you felt something was wrong? Because in the end, the truth did not save me. I did. If this story meant something to you, stay with me, share your thoughts below, and follow along for more stories that might feel a little closer to your own.